Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So this week, as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to play for Budget Magic, it struck me that lately we've been playing a lot of blue decks, a lot of somewhat dirtily decks, a lot of combo decks, but what we haven't really been doing is beating down or playing any tribal theme. So I thought this week I want to build a straight up tribal aggro deck. I want to play a whole bunch of lords and just beat people's face. So I started searching around Standard to try to figure out what tribe gave me a ton of lords, and we ended up with a tribe that I never would have expected. So this week we are playing Mono-White Servos, which I'm pretty sure gets more lords than any other tribe in Standard. We have 4 different lords, a total of 15 lords in the deck, which means all of our 1/1 servos are going to be way huger than you'd think. So as you can see, $76 in the paper world, only 16 ticks on Magic Online, so super cheap, especially on Moto. A quick reminder before we break down the deck: if you enjoy this deck and you enjoy Budget Magic in general, it would be awesome of you if you could take a quick second, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So the deck is actually pretty easy to break down. It's a deck that comes in 2 parts. So part 1 of the deck is the lords, and this is the reason that I wanted to be servos to begin with, is we just get an insane amount of lords, like modern merfolk amount of lords. We can just play lord after lord after lord, which means even though our servos are 1/1s, they end up being 2/2s or 3/3s or 5/5s or 6/6s or 8/8s. They just get massive because we can load so many lords on the battlefield. So our lords kind of do different things. They have different upsides and downsides. So let's briefly talk about them one by one. First up, we have Metallic Mimic, which is sort of a weird lord. Most lords you want to play after your other creatures. So you play a bunch of creatures, you play the lord, it pumps them up, you get in a big attack. Metallic Mimic is the opposite. You want to get Metallic Mimic on the battlefield first, and this deck naming Servo, so it becomes a servo itself, which is kind of sweet. And then every time we play a servo, when it enters the battlefield, it enters with a +1/+1 counter. So the downside is we got to play it first. The upside is it gives a bonus that stays. So other lords, if they die, the bonus goes away. The +1/+1 they're giving all of a sudden disappears. Since Mimic gives a counter, that bonus stays even if our opponent manages to kill our Metallic Mimic. Our next lord is Master Trinket Er, and this one is only a 3 of. It's the only lord that we're not playing the full 4 copies of, and the reason for that is, well, for one thing, we have a lot of 3-drops in the deck. For another thing, it dies to shock, and that's really painful. Being 3 mana and only having 2 toughness and not benefiting from our other lords. Our Metallic Mimic, the second one, benefits from the first one. Our other lords are the same way. Master Trinket Er only pumps servos and thopters, so additional copies doesn't pump itself. So there are some downsides. As weird as it sounds, it might be the worst of our lords. However, in some games it's awesome because it goes long, we kind of flat out on mana, and we can use the second ability to make 1/1 servos that are at least 2/2s because of Master Trinket Er, maybe 3/3 with Metallic Mimic, or even 4/4s if we have a Chief of the Foundry. So Chief of the Foundry is kind of a surprising lord because it doesn't actually say pump up your servos. However, servos are artifacts, so it is essentially a servo lord because it pumps up all of our artifacts. It's also in the 3 mana slot, which, as I said, is a bit overloaded, but at least it doesn't die to shock. So that's why we have more Chief of the Foundries than Master Trinket Ers. Our last lord kind of transitions us to the second part of our deck, and that's Angel of Invention. So it's the top end of our curve at 5 mana, most expensive card in the deck. It pumps up all of our creatures. It gives us a 2/1 flying lifelinker, but it also does something super important to our deck, and that is it makes servos. So when we play an Angel of Invention, not only are we getting a lord, we're also getting 2 servo tokens, which are potentially going to be huge because they're benefiting from all of our other lords as well. So the second part of our deck, which Angel kind of transitions us into, are cards that make servos, and we have some sweet ones. We have a total of 12 servo generators, not counting the Angel of Invention. So on turn 2, we have Servo Exhibition and Cogworkers Puzzle Knot. These ones are a bit weird. Servo Exhibition is really straightforward. We get two 1/1 servo tokens. Hopefully they're actually going to be like 3/3s or 5/5s because of all of our lords. Cogworker's Puzzle Knot is a slow servo exhibition. We only get one servo when it enters the battlefield, and then for 2 more mana we can sack it and get another one. It is nice that we can do that at instant speed, so on our opponent's end step or as a surprise blocker, we can kind of sneak in another servo. And then the big payoff in maybe the best card in our deck is Sram's Expertise. Oh, this card is so insane. So 4 mana, we get 3 servo tokens, but we also get to cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less for free, which means not only are other servo makers like Servo Exhibition, but most of our lords. So when we can play Sram's Expertise and immediately play a Chief of the Foundry for free, we go from maybe having 0 power on the battlefield to having like 9 power on the battlefield for only 4 mana. It's so good. It's just an absurd card in this deck. The rest of the deck is a couple of other random things. So I felt like, being an aggro deck, we really needed some 1-mana plays. We're playing all basic planes, so our lands are always untapped, so we want to have things to do. It's not good in an aggressive deck to just land go. We need to start our curve on 1. So the best option for our deck is Toolcraft Exemplar. Doesn't directly benefit from the servo strategy. However, since our servos and a bunch of our lords are artifacts, it becomes a 3/2 attacker. So it's just an aggressive start. It allows us to have starts where we go turn 1 Toolcraft, turn 2 Servo Exhibition, get in for 3, turn 3 play Chief of the Foundry, attack with Toolcraft, and our servos get in for 7, and then we basically have our opponent dead on board on turn 4, and if we have another lord. So we get really aggressive starts thanks to Toolcraft. The other 1-mana play is Animation Module, and this one is just sort of a hedge, kind of a fringe backup plan, because it combos with Metallic Mimic. So I didn't want to go all in on the combo. The problem with our deck is we don't have a ton of things that benefit from Animation Module. I guess if we put counters on our Angel of Invention, which we don't usually do, it would trigger it, but we don't really have a lot of ways to trigger it. But if we happen to get Animation Module and Metallic Mimic on the battlefield, we can make a 1/1 servo, which is actually a 2/2 servo because it's getting the Metallic Mimic counter for every mana we have, because they kind of trigger each other. So the servo will get a counter from Mimic, which will trigger Animation Module, which will let us pay 1 to get a servo, which will trigger Mimic, becoming a 2/2 with a counter, triggers Animation Module. So it's kind of a backup plan. We can just make a bunch of servos and go wide that way to win the game. We also have a bit of removal in Stasis Snare, just the least conditional removal spell in Standard. Good against Copycat combo, gets just about anything at instant speed. A couple of Aether Sphere Harvesters, just because I think this card is amazingly well positioned right now. We did a Brewer's Minute talking about it, and I feel like this card lines up incredibly well in the Standard format at the moment. So I wanted to make room for it in the deck. It crews for 1, so our servos can crew them even with no lords. Gives us a little defense in the air, lets us pressure planeswalkers, gains us life, dodges tons of removal. The card is just awesome, and I want to play it if I can. Mana base wise, 23 planes, really straightforward. In the sideboard, Authority of the Consuls to shut down the Copycat combo, Fragmentize to fight various artifacts, Aetherworks Marvel, any of the artifacts running around. There's a ton of them. A bunch more removal, Blessed Alliance and Emulating Glare to get attacking creatures, another Stasis Snare, primarily for Copycat matchups, but for other big creatures as well. Lantern Scout lets us swing aggro races. If we're fighting Mardu vehicles, kind of going back and forth in a race, one big hit with Lantern Scout with a bunch of servos and lords gains us like 10 life, 15 life, likely going to swing the race in our favor. And then Make a Stand is like budget Selfless Spirit. It's not as good, it's more expensive, it doesn't sit out on the battlefield, but it makes all our stuff indestructible, so if our opponent has Radiant Flames or a Wrath or something, this is our answer to that. Also boosts power, which can be nice. It's not a great pump spell, but it does pump up our creatures a little bit more. And that is Mono-White Servos for Aether Revolt Standard, and that's our budget magic for this week. So I think this deck is pretty sweet. It's definitely different than what we have been playing lately. Not really comboing, not doing anything crazy. I did sneak in the Animation Module, so we might kind of combo sometimes, but really with this one, our plan is to curve out and beat face and to just make our stuff huge with lords. I'm really amazed by how many lords there are for this strategy and how easy it is to make these little 1/1 servos into 4/4s and 5/5s and real powerful threats. So basically, we should be really consistent, we should be pretty aggressive, and we should be able to go wide. So hopefully that works. I think the deck is pretty solid, and if you like beating down and you like tokeny strategies and tribal strategies, I think you're going to like this deck. So anyway, that's our Budget Magic deck for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon.